This is Uncommonly Remarkable. We have surprisingly casual discussions about the lives and notable accomplishments of community leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyday folks like you and me. Think of this podcast as an opportunity to learn something new and to pick up on an entrepreneurial tip or two through open conversation. I'm Artis Beatty. I'm a doctor of optometry and the chief medical officer for My Eye Doctor OD. Though we will inevitably touch on topics within my area of expertise, the opinions and conversations held here are separate from my work with My Eye Doctor. Welcome to the show. Well, hello and welcome. I am so excited to have you here with me today, Masood. Thank you so much for taking some time to hang out.
Thank you so much for having me. This is going to be fun.
I think it's going to be absolutely amazing. And it's been a long time coming. We've kind of talked back and forth and we said, we'll get you on. And you scheduled it, made time, and now you're here. And I have so many questions for you. So we're going to have an absolute blast.
Yes, we will.
I've been thinking about it a lot, and I don't really know exactly where we want to start. So let's start with where we are today, because that may give us a little bit of the preview of some of the things that we're going to go back and touch on that got you to this point. So can you talk a little bit about where you are today and what it is that you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm back home in the Bay Area. That's where I'm living, and I've been here before. Silicon Valley was Silicon Valley, and so I got to see this entire demographic and geographical area change with big companies coming to town. And so, of course, that inspired me, beyond, of course, being an optometrist and eye care provider, to really dabble in technology. All my neighbors are in tech. I mean, every single one of them work for the big four tech companies. And so that's something that has always inspired me and made me curious. I work I consult as an advisor to Sovereign Wealth Fund, and some of what I do there is advise on due diligence for investments that they want to do in either tech, healthcare, or retail. And a lot of the tech side is really AI driven, especially these days in terms of startups and businesses and what they're trying to implement. So that's a little bit about what I do. In the last few years, I haven't done much in our industry, but we're gonna make a comeback here.
Yeah, that's why I met you in the industry, right? So way back in the day, you were working for one of two major players in the optometric industry, and you were on the technology side then. You were working with systems and EHRs, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, my first baby is what I call it, and and that system, is one of the things I'm most proud of because when you leave patient care and directly seeing patients, one of the things I wanted to do is make an impact and indirectly affect patient care in a positive way. So if we were able to innovate and find technology solutions that help the provider do what they love, which is care for patients, that's what we were trying to build there. So one of the ways you can do that is transform the heart of the practice, which is their electronic health record and practice management system. And of course that you very quickly, especially pre-COVID, we were like, oh, I'm not sure this is going to be a thing. But during COVID, telemedicine became a thing, and having
Right.
some solutions ready to go for that was a huge plus. We were maybe a little bit ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing to think about direct patient care being in clinical practice versus stepping outside of that role. And as an optometrist, there is always a tie to wanting to help people. And I call it the instant gratification, right? You're in the room, you're with a person, they have a problem, you solve it, you work with that person, and it's 15 or 20 minutes in, and you get to start that over each time, right? And
Hmm.
you leave your day having solved any number of problems.
Yeah.
It's a little different when you're outside of that lane, and then when you make a decision to be in the same industry, that's relatively consistent. But you have gone from being in the lane to out the lane to in the industry to out of the industry. What has really led that transformation for you?
I think curiosity.
Ah,
Curiosity has certainly led me to see that the world is bigger than even my specialty, and then the world is bigger than even my industry. And I still call it my industry because the vision industry is where I grew up. The vision industry is where I got, a lot of my foundational knowledge around healthcare, the foundational knowledge around businesses and how they run, whether it's a nonprofit or for profit, a publicly traded company or not. And then, dabbling and really pushing myself in the startup space, it allowed me to see the investor side of things.
Yeah.
And then when you see the investor side of things, you just wonder more. And if you're curious and if you're a lifelong learner, you want to learn more. So I networked and made connections with folks that I can learn from. I'm constantly seeking mentorship and whatnot. And I was fortunate enough to meet some amazing human beings who took me under their wing and helped me learn and really make the use out of the business side of what I wanted to do in life. And so that's kind of how the journey, you plan for these things and your plan and your ideas to go one direction, but then woof, next thing you know, you're doing something else.
Well, and in your case, you started in technology and you were working in existing technology, but you were also starting to work in AI early in the AI journey. So today we wake up, we go to sleep, we think AI. That was not always the case, and
No.
it wasn't all that long ago.
Not at all. And when we first started dabbling in AI, and by we I mean like folks that I was working with to see what the possibilities were, it was too early. I mean, we were creating solutions that can change retail, can change healthcare, that can change some other industries, and a lot of people were still trying to figure it out. And if you fast forward to today, and that was 2014. You fast forward to today, people are still trying to figure it out. Figure it out. How can I use AI in the business that I run? Um, so, back then, what cost $3 to $5 million to build, and probably 3 years of building those solutions in terms of machine learning and all the different tools around AI, you could probably do in a couple months today with a lot less money, thanks to open source code and other things that you have access to. So the world's not only changed, but AI has truly become an accelerator, and probably the greatest accelerator to many industries.
Well, and our ability to process, or the processing power within chipsets, is one of the drivers. And so I'm not a tech person per se, meaning I don't know all of the details behind the scenes, but I am very interested in technology. And I was reading an article around limits of processing power because of the number of chips, and the fact that we're getting down to atom-sized ways of processing. And there's a limit to how many of these atom-sized things you can add to a chipset in order to be able to process. And there's a company that was working on technology that would, instead of using electricity, which has limits in its ability or speed, they were actually starting to develop processing through light. And so they were using photons, and they were bisecting it into three different wavelengths to allow simultaneous processing. And so the speed that the processing could happen was now light speed rather than
Mm.
limited through by electricity throughput. But it's really interesting to me that processing power is really one of the driving things that has allowed the speed up in what we hear about as AI.
Well, absolutely. And you mentioned a few things here. So one is just processing power, right? And how much power is required? How much power is required to power up all of these different AI models and whatnot? And these are large data sets, and you could see big companies in the tech space. Those organizations are building nuclear plants and whatnot, right? So just to power the technology in the future here. So there's that piece of it, but something else that you mentioned that's really interesting is how technology can be packed into something so tiny.
Yeah.
And when you can do that, now it opens the world for what we call edge computing, but where the computers can sit in tiny little spaces. So of course we have smart eyewear now and things like that are coming in. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it can compute so much and it's sitting right here in such a small little space. And so what's going to be interesting about this is that makes technology practical.
Mm.
And not only practical, but you know, the best technology is invisible. So when you actually have the hardware that can support the software that can then make technology invisible, your use cases and adoption rate increases tremendously.
And It's that invisible technology that I think is most interesting to people, including myself, right? So being able to think about wearables, to think how it interacts with automobiles, to think about how it interacts with travel. Like it's a very interesting time to start seeing this technology come to life and start to really play in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many use cases, but you mentioned a key word there, wearables. And I always talk about before the existence of technology, the oldest wearable that was massively adopted amongst human beings were these guys,
Yeah,
glasses.
glasses.
So, everyone's trying to figure out the next watch or the next ring or the next bracelet or the next necklace, whatever it is in terms of wearables. But I really believe our industry, out of any industry, has the potential to move this technology forward faster than any other industry because we have always had the oldest wearable with our customer base, our consumers, our patients.
Yeah, and the prevalence of eyewear is something that I notice all the time because it's kind of like you notice what you do, right? So I see how many people are wearing some form of spectacle, whether that's
Mhm.
prescription or sunglass, and the thought that you could include so many other types of things in that device that they need to wear anyway is
Mhm.
really, really interesting. And it's really why a lot of the research that I know about is aimed towards figuring out how to make these things better and smarter.
Yeah, absolutely. But it doesn't have to be a wearable. I mean, if you think about the power of this technology, it could be just other things that it can do in our world, right? So whether it's how patients interact with doctors, how consumers interact with retail businesses, and we're in both. Our industry's always been in both, and I think there's a lot of potential beyond collecting information from wearables. But there is, I think, a tie to wearables and healthcare that's going to be something we'll see during our lifetime.
I think you're exactly right. And I think we're starting to see some of those things materialize today.
Hmm.
And with people like you on the forefront of kind of thinking about what can be next, I think that you're gonna head in a direction that maybe we're not actually thinking about yet, but will be surprisingly interesting over the course of the next several years.
Well, I don't know if I'd consider myself at the forefront. I'm always learning, and I get humbled quite often. But I will say one thing that I've always believed, even going way back to, we saw Google Glasses come out one day,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And we saw, oh my gosh, you can start to use your eyewear as a form of technology. And then there were some things that didn't work out so well for them. But then as you see these new iterations of technology that is, included in eyewear, smart eyewear specifically, you start to realize the potential there. And Mark Zuckerberg even said the future of how we use our mobile devices is going to be through our eyewear. And
Mm.
what's funny is I'm no Mark Zuckerberg, so nobody heard me say it, but I always believed it. I've always told all my friends, I said, this is the future of your cell phone, and your smartphones specifically. And everyone's like, yeah, maybe, maybe not. But what made it difficult to process for us was the fact that the hardware was so big. So it ties back to your very important and pertinent comment, which was, everything is becoming small enough
Small. Yeah,
to make it
small.
possible.
If you Google hard enough, you'll find some video of me on YouTube with Google Glass way back then because
Okay.
it was one of those things where we're trying to figure out, can you make them more accessible? How are people going to interact and use with them? And to your point, there were lots of things that were not fantastic about Google Glass, but the innovation is really one of those things that set the wearables motions forward,
Yeah.
right? And then as we fast forward, I mean, there are products out there that people are clamoring for. Over the holidays, I went into some of the big box stores because you're always thinking what technology is out there. What can I give as a gift? And I was really
Yeah.
surprised to see Metas as an example, which are a frame product for those who are not familiar that have both listening and cameras built into the frame, and it
Hmm.
allows you to interact with your environment without having to have that phone screen up in front of you for thinking things like video or photos, etc. and there were lines of people trying to get these things from big box stores, right? And so what started as Google Glass and maybe not the most successful thing is going to continue to evolve into products that everyday people want.
Absolutely. And I think you said something that resonates with me. You said to be able to interact with your environment. And one of the things that, smartphones do for us every day is it actually takes us away from our environment. And people who have it out, you go, you're not being present.
Yeah.
But to be able to be present with a layer of technology, you're really talking about augmented reality. So a
Mm,
reality with a digital layer, a filter, if you will, of technology to really modify how you interact with your surroundings. And I think that is going to be the direction where smart eyewear is going to head. And also going to be really cool to see. I mean, you and I could be at a cafe, the same cafe, but I'm listening to different music than you are because we have different jam. Maybe you got jazz going on. Maybe I got a little bit of Tupac going on. Whatever it is, right?
right?
And then I've got a different lighting environment or a different art in that same cafe that we're both hanging out in and having a cup of joe. So it's really neat to see the future of where this is headed. And also, for our colleagues, in the eye care space, our patients will be interacting with us differently in
Hmm.
the exam lane, right? They'll have different symptoms, different things. There's a lot of things that we don't know in terms of vision performance. I was one of the folks who created the Vision Performance Center at Stanford University, and one of the things we were trying to figure out and do research on is how long can someone interact in a virtual reality headset before vision performance declines? And that can mean a number of things, right?
Mm.
Whether it be field of view, endurance, accuracy, multi-tracking, detection, all these different things. These are the things that we are going to have to catch up on as technology advances, and then our patients come to us with new concerns or different types of symptoms that maybe we weren't aware of, or questions we aren't used to asking.
Yeah, that's a really really good point. The computer human or human computer interaction is something that is changing over time, and
Yeah,
there are significant things that we as human beings have now as symptoms and diagnosable disorders because of our interaction with computers. Or computer-like work, right?
hmm,
So if you think about carpal tunnel as just an example, carpal tunnel
great
the,
example.
it's a it was not prevalent or as prevalent until we began to type as much as we type, and when we
Perfect.
started using computers as much as we use computers with the mouse and the keyboard, it became even more prevalent, right?
That's
And
right.
so you're exactly right. What are the things that visually we're going to end up diagnosing or having to name because of our changes in our interactions with our technology?
Absolutely. No, that's and that what a perfect example, man. It's almost like you prepped for this, but I know you didn't. Uh, the other piece of this is hopefully those devices help us. Hopefully there'll be a way to connect with the doctor in a way, because I really believe the Apples of the world and other big tech companies are going to have a health department to it, right? They're
Yeah.
going to have, they're already doing it. I mean, look at Apple Watch, right? And you could see all the different things it can monitor. It could tell you if your heart rate is up. It could tell you if you're low in oxygen saturation. It tells you a little bit about your monitoring your exercise and your where you are, and screen time is being captured on our smartphones. So the opportunity there is connecting that to the healthcare providers and the healthcare systems. So then we can have a more holistic view of what our patients do outside of our exam lane, which I call a fake environment, right?
Yeah.
We do our
Yeah.
visual acuity. Can you see this 2020 letter in a dark room? But they're out there in the real world where there's bright environments and different types of letters and sizes and things that they're looking at. So it'll be very interesting to see how that all unfolds.
And the expectation that people have with the way they interact with us, right? The It continues to evolve because if you look at what we are used to from an eye exam perspective, we're used to coming into an office, seeing a doctor, maybe seeing a technician beforehand, to your point, sitting in a dark room with a high contrast chart, being asked if it's better one or two, there being some magic that happens, and all of a sudden we have this pair of glasses or contact lenses and we see well. But that that pathway, that journey has gotten different incrementally over time. You know, if you think about where optometry was, maybe we'll call it 100 years ago, there were no autorefractors, so there was no way for us to kind of get an idea of where you were from a glasses perspective. But people came into the office and expected that interaction, and maybe the refraction took a little longer, or there were some more indirect or ways to get there.
Hmm.
We layered in autorefractors, and we layered in keratometry, and all of a sudden we got more information.
Hmm.
We layered in retinal imaging. We've got OCT technology, new
Hmm.
information. So people are now expecting to be able to have those types of interactions.
Hmm.
And ultimately, to your earlier point about telehealth, optometry has a way of interacting with people from a telehealth perspective that I think is unique and different than the way you think about it from traditional medicine, including the ability for a patient to be in one spot and a doctor to be in another spot and still have a lot of that traditional interaction, including being able to figure out vision. And that gets better with AI.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, boy, you mentioned so many great topics here. I mean, if you look at telehealth, what drove us to telehealth? Well, access to care, one, right? So access to from a patient to provider, connection. So that kind of drove us to telehealth solutions, and also convenience. Yeah, we
Yeah,
forget about that. One of the reasons Amazon's one of the biggest companies in the world, it's because of this idea of convenience, and Amazonian consumerism is what drives even other expectations in different industries, right? So these are the same
true.
consumers that are our patients, but sometimes we just think of them as patients. So, I could kind of bridge this discussion to the retail side of our business, right? So we
Yeah,
sell glasses, we sell contacts, and a lot of how we interact with patients today is from a healthcare provider perspective. But I've seen thriving practices in this nation really do well when they start to transition that patient care to, all right, a consumer model on their retail side. And when they do that, they start to really meet that consumer now, no longer patient, even though there is a medical device here,
yep,
but they meet that consumer where they would like to be met. And I think that's what's going to change in our industry, and that needs to change. I'm very, very passionate about retail because it's where I grew up. It's my father had me working in his retail shops at a very young age. But when I think about the retail, it's also what drove me to optometry. And went, oh, I could care for people, and there's a retail side of the business. How cool! It's a dream come true. And but when I think about that, I think about all the opportunities on the retail side too.
well, and I was going to ask you about that, right? Like, what drove you to optometry? But the retail experience with your father, that's interesting to me. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think, people who don't know me, I always start with, if you really want to know who I am, you have to hear a very short story of my upbringing because it really does shape you in a way that you can't really predict. And, there was a lot of uncertainty during my, developmental ages. And part of that was because I was born in Kabul, Afghanistan. It was during the Cold War. I was 9 months old when a bomb hit our house. And while we were in the house. So somehow we survived. And when we survived, we immediately got like a Jeep Wrangler of the time and hit the Himalayan mountains and ended up in the slums of Delhi. We lived in the slums of Delhi
Oh,
for about 2 years, and then, as refugees, and we finally made our way to Hamburg, Germany, where we lived with my mom's uncle for about 2 years. And I started going to preschool in Germany. And
oh wow.
don't ask me if I know German because I certainly do not, and I didn't learn much there. But then, with a couple $100 in her pocket, my mother took me and my sister, and we ended up just outside of Amsterdam. She predicted to be there for a few weeks. We ended up being there for about 8 months to 10 months or so. She can't really remember, but almost a year. And then, I was about 5 years old, and we immigrated to the U.S., became citizens, and started our lives all over again. And we first lived in Flushing, New York, and then we settled in the Bay Area with the rest of our family. had migrated to. So my father, when I was 6, said, "All right, typical Afghan father, like, let's get to work. You're my only son. Let's go." And so what we used to do on weekends is we would go to the garage sales, buy items that we can resell, and then we would take that to the Oakland flea market and resell them. So I would get up 3 a.m. every Saturday, Sunday, and come home around 8 p.m. And part of that experience was, I had to learn Spanish because a lot of my consumers were
Yeah.
Spanish speakers. So I learned how to really, obviously, how to sell something, and then also how to connect with your customer in a different way. And, that was something that you can't really read a book and learn. So I was very fortunate. Looking back, I was fortunate. Don't ask you if you had interviewed 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old Masood, he'd be telling you how much I hated my weekends and how much I loved school because school was a break for me. So definitely that kind of upbringing allowed me to not even. That's part of why that journey is part of why I wanted to care for people.
Yeah.
Seeing a lot of
Yeah.
people who needed care, and definitely it opened my heart. But then, so that's why I wanted to be a provider, a patient provider. And then when I started to think about the retail side and everything else I loved doing that my father had taught me, that's what led me to optometry.
That's that's pretty amazing. Like when I knew that you were a refugee, I did not know that there were so many stops along the way as you and your family made your way to the U.S. and then ultimately to the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And you were so young. Were there things that you still remember from the time where you were moving from place to place that stick with you today?
I think my memory really started kicking in maybe the last year of India and then some of Germany. I uh, I don't remember a lot about India, but I do have a few pictures. And as you can imagine, when a bomb hits your house, you lose all your baby photos. So the first pictures that I have of me as a child, and now I have, two boys of my own, and I'm like, I wonder if I looked like that when I was 6 months old. I don't know.
Wow.
But thankfully I have my mom to tell me, yeah, he totally resembles you as a baby. And but when I started, the first set of pictures I have of my youth was in India celebrating Holi and celebrating all these different festivals that they had. But then Germany's where I even have vivid memories of the bus stop, of the stairs of going up to the preschool, and the interacting with my German teacher who was speaking to me in German, and I was like
Right.
completely, I have no idea what you're saying, lady. So, so all of that, yeah, I do remember some of that.
There, that has got to be one of the things that's just really tough to be preschool. You don't speak the language. You've moved multiple times, and this lady, who I'm sure was very, very nice, was speaking
Amazing.
to you
Yeah,
in German.
I do remember her being kind.
Now, how old are your boys?
I have a 6-month-old and a 2-year-old.
Oh, wow, wow. So when you think about the boys, are
Yeah.
there things that you remember from growing up with your dad that you're like, oh my gosh, I got to make sure that as they grow up, I do those things, and so that I just wonder,
Yeah.
when you talk about that being the impetus of wanting to help people, it makes me curious on how you think about that.
I think about it all the time. I had such a different upbringing than they do now, right? And I think of how fortunate and blessed we are, and also what a great nation this is that gives me the opportunity to tell a story like this. I actually am one of the proudest Americans you'll ever find because of what I've been able to accomplish here in the world of opportunity. So, I don't take that for granted any day. How do I teach my kids these things? They
Yeah.
didn't have the hardships I had, and how do I teach them to be responsible, teach them to um, truly become good human beings, but also people who can be reliable and those things. And I think a lot of that you learn. Some of it hopefully is nature, and some of it is nurture. Hey, if you have the answer, let me know because I'm still trying to figure it out.
That's one of those things I'm answer free on, but I am willing to
Yeah.
take advice. Tell
Same.
me, tell me about. I know that you played sports
Yeah.
growing up or into college, right? You football
Yep.
and boxing, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So, of course, middle school, high school, tried every sport, and in high school, I played three sports. I was a volleyball, basketball, football, and captain and whatnot. And I loved sports. I felt like sports gave me an outlet
Mm,
to uh, really push myself because, of course, till this day, I give my teachers a lot of credit. I give my coaches a lot of credit to allowing me to see, push your limits. You're an athlete, you know this. You know, sports teaches you something about not giving up and how hard it is to give up the first time and how easy it can become after.
yeah,
So, and the toughest sport I played was boxing for sure. And they don't. That's something that even in the English language we say we play sports, but we don't say we play box. It's
that's
a
right.
serious sport. So in college I was a collegiate boxer, part of the NCBA, USA Boxing Amateur Boxers. So
Really?
yeah, so that was something that I was, I went 19-1 overall. We have this little black book, they call it, that keeps all your fights and records and whatnot. So that's something that, your coach, each coach would always say like, hey, he doesn't have much experience and whatnot. Let's match him up with one of your inexperienced guys, and then let me see the black book. Because when you look at that, you got their record, you know how many fights, you know how they won, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is as corrupt in the collegiate level as it is professionally. Uh,
Wow.
but I did walk onto the football team at UC Davis, and before I started boxing, and because they had just now become a D1 program, my coach said, "Yeah, you probably get some playing time as you get better. You're kind of not the tallest guy. You got the speed. That's good." And I said, well, "Fifth year?" That's what he said. You might get some playing time your fifth year. I was like, "I can't afford to be here 5 years. I have to go and start my career because what drove me was financially taking care of my parents. My
Mm,
biggest dream, even in high school, was to buy my parents a house, and I was able to fulfill that thanks to optometry, thanks to the hard work we put in, but also the profession we're in. I was able to buy them a house my first year out of school. So that was my dream. And so
that's
I was like, this
amazing.
year, forget that. So I'm gonna go box. So
That's amazing. So, I often ask people who played sports growing up. So, as you know, I really didn't discover doing anything from a sports perspective until into my adulthood. I call it I didn't play sports ball, but I'm always intrigued by people who had a sports career. Is there something any particular that you took from those years of playing sports that you now apply every day that you do?
yeah, I think two things. One is playing team sports. You
Mm-hmm.
realize you're only as good as your weakest link.
Mm,
So it was so important for us to be cohesive, communicate, and work hard and push each other. And then you also started to learn this dynamic that, you know, very successful people are sometimes the hardest working folks in the world.
mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're fortunate, but hard
Yeah.
work doesn't. So people who are sometimes not the hardest workers in the world, they don't like overachievers because it makes them look bad. And then overachievers don't
Ah,
like the folks that don't work as hard because it's a team sport. So I learned a little bit about those dynamics, which was interesting. And then
yeah.
the thing that boxing has taught me, which I believe I learned the most amount of life lessons through that sport, was one, you really learn about yourself when your back is against the ropes
Mm-hmm.
and you have nowhere to go. You can't leave that ring once that fight starts. So it defines who you are. Adversity defines your character.
Mm,
The other thing I learned while boxing is if you prepare better than any one of your opponents, your chance of failure decreases dramatically. So I
mm.
would always go into every fight knowing I know my opponent didn't run 10 miles of bleachers every day like I did. I know they didn't work as hard as I did. I know. So I came with an incredible amount of confidence stepping into every fight. And I think that really taught me that in the moment, you will do great if you put in the time beforehand. Preparation's key.
And I think that's incredible to hear. And and to go along with that, I have never really thought about what you mentioned just a few minutes before, that it is very difficult to quit the first time, but a lot easier after that. And that's really powerful because it's a very true statement, and it also goes along with the other two things you just mentioned. And so it's interesting to me to hear you verbalize those things, because looking at some of the things that you've been involved in, the achievements that you've done, particularly as a relatively young fella, I mean, it says a lot about the way you think about going through life.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, I really feel like I'm one of the most fortunate people on earth. Masood actually translates to fortunate or lucky, you know? So I'm like, oh, there's a reason why I was named this name, right? You know, and but I do believe, and I credit a lot of my teachers. I credit the folks that have taught me, my mentors, my teachers, my coaches, to shape my mindset in a way that allows me to be successful in anything that I do. I appreciated them so much that when I started seeing patients, I went back to my high school and coached as an assistant coach to the varsity boys basketball team. So I can instill some of those characteristics in them as they take on the world that I was so fortunate to get from my teachers and my coaches.
And so, as you've taken these experiences and you've kind of molded them into from your personal life into your professional life, you've been in that mentoring role, or at least the entrepreneurial mentoring role, when it comes to multiple companies that you've been involved in along the way.
Mhm.
And what what did some of those companies do on the technology side that really kind of contributed to where we are from an AI perspective now?
Well, you know, one of the companies that we worked on early on was we reverse engineered the neurovisual pathway um, because and into software because the thesis was that we can teach a camera how to perceive,
Mm,
because a lot of vision is just taking in visual cues, and then the real processing happens in this computer. So how do we teach a computer to process uh, what is taken in visually? And you can do that through cameras. So you know, that kind of technology even today has a lot of use cases.
hmm
But you know, we see it a lot today. Actually, it's become more common. If you think about eye tracking devices, there's cameras today that can start to tell you how a person is feeling emotionally, whether it's because their pupils are dilated or their you know, interpalpebral fissure is like huge and they're excited, or their eyebrows are moving, you know, facial structures and facial movement. So there's a lot of that can happen. Back then, that's what we were dabbling in. So you know, and I think we were a little bit early, typical
Yeah.
for me. But you know, that was some of the things that we were doing to see all the different use cases. And now you could think about different ways you can interact with folks. So let's just say in a retail environment, if you're interacting with product A versus product B and you feel a certain way, you know, maybe as you pick up this product, there's a digital screen that could tell you more information about that product because it tracked what you were looking at. And so it actually can impact consumer intention,
Mm,
behavior, and action. So you can actually in real time, and these are measures. We talk about this in the corporate space a lot. Lead measures versus lag measures. Lag measures, you
yeah.
can't really do much about it. It's a transaction. It already
hmm
happened. Whereas lead measures, if you can actually impact that, you can change behavior, intention, and action before you get to transactions. And I think that was, you know, one of the really incredible use cases of that technology.
Wow. Yeah, this the thought or the concept of being able to change interactions with products is really, really interesting. If you talk about being early, so if you go back and think about even movies, because movies and shows sometimes showcase things that are not yet possible but should be or could be, right?
Yeah.
So Minority Report as an example, he walks into the Gap, and the Gap recognizes who he is, and it's like making suggestions based on the last few things that were purchased and things that should go along. Like we are in an environment where those types of interactions could conceivably be more possible now.
Yeah, we are. Within the world of AI, we're still a little early, and some people have a hard time believing that as they're learning more about it. But there's different forms of artificial intelligence too. When you talk about movies, I think of like iRobot,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and like what, or even the Terminator, right? You start thinking about all these crazy movies and all the dangers of technology and technological advancements in the world. But AI is pretty simple today. We're in the weak AI space or artificial narrow intelligence space right now,
Okay.
which basically a lot of these machines and a lot of the software that and let's kind of actually break it down. How
Okay.
how do you define artificial intelligence? It's when a software or a machine can learn, can reason, and can problem solve.
Okay.
Where we are today is a lot of those technologies can really do that for one specific task at a time.
Okay.
So for one specific task at a time, you can talk to a chatbot like you do with ChatGPT or Llama or Gemini, all these different large language models. You ask it a question, and then it provides an answer to your question, one task. And it's that's where we are with AI today. As we start to see in the next few years, and I feel like we're getting there, and this is what I'm talking about, it's moving fast. You start to
Hmm.
get to artificial general intelligence. This is when a machine becomes as intelligent as a human.
Okay.
Then there's something called artificial superintelligence, and that's, I think, kind of like iRobot, right?
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
the machine is more intelligent than a human being. And that can get scary, right? So they're talking about artificial intelligence ethics and responsibility and all of that good stuff. So yeah, I mean, we could talk about that all day, but I'll stop there.
So, what is I read or saw a notation for Web 3, and I don't know what that is. What is Web 3?
Well, I mean, if you think about the internet today and the internet that we're used to using, it's Web 2.0.
Okay.
And Web 3.0 is kind of the future state of that, right? So
Oh, okay.
a lot of folks who work in the metaverse space,
Hmm.
they say we're in the Web 3 space, and so you start talking about virtual worlds, you start talking about different type of technology, blockchain, a lot of these other things, and we had actually in one of the virtual worlds, I created the very first optical. It's still it's still
Who
there
does that?
today. Yeah. And I was so curious, and we're like, what can we do here? Well, it's an interesting thing. So let's define metaverse.
Okay.
Metaverse is defined as meta, which means beyond, and verse, universe. So beyond our universe today is the metaverse. You and I are actually in the metaverse right now. We're virtually connecting. All right,
Okay.
it's beyond our physical universe.
Hmm.
And so FaceTime is a form of the metaverse, telehealth is a form of metaverse, Zoom meetings, webinars. So it's a different way of interacting. Well, virtual worlds is a different way to interact as well. You take your avatar, I take mine. I got some cool loop earrings in my avatar because I always wanted that, but it's not my thing. And my avatar can go and talk with you, and we can actually go to a virtual casino and gamble. We can go to a virtual optical and buy a pair of glasses. And my thesis was when you start looking at Gen Z and how they interact in virtual worlds,
Hmm.
90% of them, when they enter, they walk out with a purchase. People find that baffling. It's a pretty staggering statistic. So if that was true during COVID, that's when I remember learning that statistic first. Then I said, let's build an optical and let's see if they buy a pair of glasses for their very cool avatar.
Yeah.
What if we find a business relationship where it also drop ships them the real pair of glasses to their address, physical address, and we
Incredible.
start to connect online and offline. I'm a big fan of connecting online and offline retail.
Hmm.
I think there's so much opportunity in that space. I mean, even the big box retailers, what do they do today? They have so much data. When I go to HomeDepot.com, BestBuy.com, any of these big box retailers, they know what I'm doing. They know what I have in my cart. They know what I'm buying.
So
They know
true.
what I remove. They know, and then, but what data do they have on their offline brick and mortar stores?
Yeah, not nearly as much.
Not nearly as much, and they don't even know how to connect the two. And I think they are starting to. I mean, you start to see technology emerging in this space, but a whole world of opportunity there.
Wow, that it is that part is very interesting to me, and that you're right. There is very limited connectivity today, and there's a lot of opportunity for that. There are times when you have shopped online, as an example. We'll use a big box store. Home Depot is a great one. You've shopped online, and you go into the store and they have figured out who you are based on card numbers or what have you, and then they will start to interact with you about things that you've shopped online. But there's not a way for them to connect you before you actually make the purchase in the in store. And so that would be evolving technology that could really enhance the way I interact with going to the Home Depot, which is one of those things I tend to do on a regular basis because I'm always working on a project.
Yep. And if you think about it, what they're doing in the back end, and they're using AI for these things, but they're collecting data on your patterns. What type of products do you like to look at? What type of, based on certain items in your cart or certain items you viewed, they could probably even predict which project you're working on.
Yeah,
Thanks
yeah,
to the power of AI, that can happen in real time. So then what it does is it actually takes artists and says artist is in this bucket of our personas. Because we talk about personalization and how the world is moving towards personalization. But what's more practical is something I call personalization.
huh?
So you won't know everything about me. That would make everything personalized. But
That's
you can
right.
probably know enough about me to create a persona and see who else is in that bucket of
Yeah,
demographics.
who's similar?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Masood, as you think about where the where technology is going, the things that are changing, how swiftly it's changing, there are ways to correlate that with most of the things that we face day to day when we're making decisions about any of our career choices or our hobby choices or what we want to do next. If you could give advice to someone who is perhaps early and thinking about introducing something different, whether it be from a career side or an invention or technology, what would you advise them?
Well, there's layers to this. First, it's I think the human side of us.
Yeah.
Who are we? What drives us? What makes us passionate? What are we passionate about? And then if you, I think, tie passion to purpose, there's nothing that's going to stop you but you.
Yeah.
First thing I always say is even when I do this, even when I adopt new teams or hire new people that would directly report to me or work with other people who are colleagues of mine, there's actually a game. It's on Amazon. You can buy and there's other places you can buy it, but it's a deck and it's called calling cards. And when you go through this exercise, the goal is to identify your top 5 callings in life. And when you do that,
Wow.
you start to really know about yourself. And what you'll find amazing about this is when you have folks who are creative
Hmm.
or they want to create things or build things or whatnot, they're usually in a product role or in a creative design role, or they're actually doing what calls them, right? So
Right.
one, I think, is connecting and understanding what your passion is, and then also aligning that with your purpose. So that's what you should work on. Then you can identify. Then you look externally and say, which, knowing that, where can I make an impact? And because I know I'll love it, you have to look for a problem you want to solve.
Mm.
And then when you look at that problem, something I tell young entrepreneurs is, and folks that don't have a lot of experience, I say, make sure that problem's big enough to put in all that work, because you want to look at the total addressable market. Then you want to look at okay, that's the total addressable market. What about the serviceable addressable market? And then out of that serviceable addressable market, let's look at that that group that you can actually obtain based on your network, based on your capabilities, abilities, based on the seed capital you've gotten for that startup, if you will. And do you have enough people to go and do this? If you're the inventor but not the sales guy, Do you have somebody who can pitch it? So then there's all of that, and then so I always say that, make sure you solve, look for the problem you're trying to solve, and then make sure it's big enough for you to put in all your time, effort, blood, sweat, and tears.
Wow. I think that's great. I think that's great advice. It's one of those things where you you have to aim in the right direction, but given the conversation around understanding there will be challenges, understanding that there may be pushback, being able to position yourself or prepare yourself for those things is important. And knowing that you're working from passion and purpose puts you in that position.
Absolutely, yeah. And and when you look on the business side of things, what makes a successful business unstoppable, and from my opinion, is when they have sustainable competitive advantages.
Mm,
And there's this exercise that I've like coined and created because I just found that so interesting. If you look at any business in the world, no matter what it does, if you find and identify the sustainable competitive advantages, you have found competitive advantages that provide value, that are rare, that there is no substitute for,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and you have an organization that can deliver on it.
It's a great exercise. Like you really should. I think you're exactly right. It's an exercise that should be done by any organization, person, or business because it really does help you understand what you are and how you differentiate yourself among competitors.
Yeah.
So I have to know what's next. What's next for you?
Well, I don't know specifically, at least in the vision industry, what I'll be doing next, but I will tell you that whatever it is, it'll align with my passion and purpose, which is around innovation, around driving our industry forward, and most importantly, to provide and make an impact. And that's what I hope to do. And I have faith I'll find a way to do that. In terms of outside of this industry, I've been fortunate enough to sit on a couple boards and work on some technologies and
Mm-hmm.
learn every day, but work with some really brilliant people and founders to on some cutting edge technology and folks that are really changing other industries. So I love it when you can take information from industries outside of our industry and
Mm-hmm.
bring it to our industry, a whole different perspective. And this is what makes us great, right? We are all unique, we're diverse, we bring different perspectives to the table, different knowledge, experience, education. That's what makes thriving organizations. And I hope that I can bring that to an organization or two.
Well, any organizational two would be they would greatly benefit from having you join or bring consulting to them. So
Okay,
thank you
thank you.
again for sitting with me because this has been pretty awesome. I think I've learned. I'm going to have to go back and catalog all the things that I've learned now. And so don't be surprised if I'm
Yeah.
calling you with question after question because this technology thing now, thinking about AI, thinking about processing, and now that I understand Web3, I'm going to formulate a lot of questions about it.
Well, you're one of the most brilliant people I know, and you have a huge heart. So thank you so much for having me. And it's been
Oh,
an honor to be on this show with you. We've been friends a long time, and I'm always grateful to spend time with you. Thank you.
If you've made it this far, then I have to thank you for your time. I hope you've learned something new and enjoyed listening to the discussion as much as I enjoyed having it. I'd love to hear from you about the show because we're working really hard to bring you great content and the feedback really helps us get better. If you like what you've heard or watched, for those of you who are streaming out on YouTube, then take a split second to give us a thumbs up or a like. It really helps other people like you find the show too. And no one likes to miss out on the good stuff, so go ahead and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't have to wonder when or if there's a new episode. And until next time, stay remarkable.